Sunday with Laura Kuenssberg.
Good morning. The Prime Minister is with us live as we discuss war and peace. Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the opposition, joins us too to say we must spend more to keep us safe. The Lib Dem leader, Ed Davey, wants President Zelensky to be honoured in Parliament. We'll hear the voice of Ukraine as the war goes on. And our team at the desk, journalist and Trump whisperer Piers Morgan, legendary broadcaster Christiane Amanpour, and Trump backer Greg Swenson, the chair of Republicans Overseas. Good morning. Today really matters. President Zelensky is already in London. He was warmly welcomed with a hug by Keir Starmer in Downing Street yesterday. The Prime Minister is trying to pick up the pieces and find a lasting settlement for Ukraine. And he's with us live, I'm pleased to say. Good morning, Prime Minister. Well, the job of resolving all of this has arguably made much harder by what happened in the Oval Office on Friday. Now, just in case anybody has been living under a rock, let's just give people a flavour of what happened.
You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having
I'm not playing cards.
Right now, you don't.
You're
playing cards.
Mr. President.
You're playing cards.
Serious.
You're gambling with the lives of
war.
millions of people. You're gambling with World War III.
Prime Minister, where were you when you saw those images and what went through your mind?
I was in my office and nobody wants to see that. Later that day, I then picked up the phone to President Trump, and I picked up the phone to President Zelensky because, to my mind, the focus has to be a lasting peace in Ukraine, which is really important for the security and defence of Europe and of the United Kingdom. And therefore, I took to the phones. That was my response.
And what did you say to President Trump? Because you say nobody wants to see that, but many people were appalled by what they saw, a war leader being berated by the man who's meant to be the leader of the free world. So what did you say to Donald
nobody
Trump?
wants to see that. Clearly, there's a lot of tension. The cameras were on. Nobody wants to see that. But I spoke to President Trump. I spoke to President Zelensky. Obviously, we then had President Zelensky to Downing Street yesterday, and I spoke to President Macron after that, and then to President Trump. And the purpose, or my driving purpose, has been to bridge this, if you like, and get us back to the central focus. And as a result of the meeting yesterday, we had quite a long time with President Zelensky, then President Macron and President Trump on the phone. We've now agreed that the United Kingdom, along with France and possibly one or two others, will work with Ukraine on a plan to stop the fighting. And then we'll discuss that plan with the United States. So in those calls on Friday night, through the meeting yesterday, into the calls again last night, I think we've got a step in the right direction because, as I say, nobody wants to see what happened on Friday, but it's really important that we keep our central focus, which is lasting peace in Ukraine. Nobody wants any more bloodshed.
And everybody wants to hear the details of what the proposals might be that you are trying to get agreed. But what happens matters so much because it's about the trust and the relationship between the two men at the centre of this, President Zelensky and President Trump. President Trump said it's difficult to do business like this. He made it completely clear that he didn't have, in that moment, very much sympathy for Ukraine. He was berating President Zelensky, telling him he should be grateful. And I think, Prime Minister, anyone who's known you for a long time would have a pretty good guess that you would have felt deeply uncomfortable watching what played out. Did you?
Yes, I felt uncomfortable. Nobody wants to see that. But the important thing is how to react to that. There are a number of different routes people could go down. One is to ramp up the rhetoric as to how outraged we all are or not. The other is to do what I did, which is roll up my sleeves, pick up the phone, talk to President Trump, talk to President Zelensky, then invite President Zelensky for an extensive meeting yesterday, warm welcome, and then further pick up the phone to President Macron and President Trump afterwards, because my reaction was we have to bridge this. We have to find a way that we can all work together, because in the end, we've had 3 years of bloody conflict now. We need to get to that lasting peace. And I have to say, I've spoken to President Trump a number of times. I've met him twice. We had a long session on Thursday. I'm clear in my mind that he does want lasting peace. He does want an end to the fighting in Ukraine. I'm absolutely clear that's what his motive is. I agree with that. President Zelensky agrees with that. I think everybody agrees with that, apart from Putin. And in the end, that remains the central, most important thing, which is why we took a step forward, in my view, last night when we agreed that we would work on a plan for stopping the fighting and then, as it were, discuss that plan with the United States. That's a step forward from where we were on Friday, and an important step forward.
And again, we will come to the details of that in just a second. But when it comes to the two versions of Donald Trump that we've seen this week, I think that's why many people were so sort of flummoxed by what they saw, because the version in the Oval Office with you gave the impression, as you say, that he does want a lasting peace, that he is sympathetic to your aim to protect Ukraine in the long term. Then the next day we saw a completely different version who appeared just to want it over, not particularly interested, said he was in the middle of Ukraine and Russia. He didn't want to give Ukraine any advantage. So which President Trump should our viewers believe? The one who was with you on Thursday or the one who was on Friday?
Well, I'm clear in my mind that he wants a lasting peace. That comes from my discussions with him on Thursday. We had extensive discussions. I've obviously met him before that, back in September in New York, and I've talked to him a number of times on the phone, including Friday night and Saturday night. So my strong view is that he wants a lasting peace. And I agree with him about that. President Zelensky agrees with him about that. And I think nobody wants this conflict to go on, least of all the Ukrainians. It's not in our national interest. And we've got to be absolutely focused on that as we go forward. But I'm clear, in my view, that President Trump wants lasting peace. And I agree with him on that.
And President Trump, we've heard him many times talk about the deal. What do you understand to be in President Trump's ceasefire deal or the peace deal? What do you understand that to mean?
Well, a lasting peace.
But what does that mean to Donald Trump?
Well, that means a line that is agreed, the terms of the deal, and then that line is defended. And we discussed this at length on Thursday, because you can't have a deal that then falls apart. And that is what President Zelensky is worried about. He's pretty open about that. There was the Minsk deal, obviously, before. It didn't hold. And so President Zelensky is rightly concerned that if there's to be a deal, it has to hold. And that's why we've talked extensively about what are the guarantees. In what way do we all defend the deal if a deal is made? So
let's take those things in turn. So you say there would be a line agreed. Where would the line between Russia and Ukraine be agreed? Can you tell us that today?
No. That's obviously a subject for discussion, and it has to be an issue centrally for the Ukrainians. And that's why I've said throughout, there can be no discussion about Ukraine without Ukraine. But what I am clear about is that if there is to be a deal, if there is to be a stopping of the fighting, then that agreement has to be defended, because the worst of all outcomes is that there is a temporary pause and then Putin comes again. That has happened in the past. I think it is a real risk, and that is why we must ensure that if there's a deal, it's a lasting deal, not a temporary pause.
And has Donald Trump told you, given you his word, that America would guarantee the security of such a deal?
Well, that was an intense part of the discussion we had on Thursday. I think you will have heard him in the press conference that we had, being clear that he would always have our backs. That's been the situation for many, many years, and a very clear commitment to Article 5 of NATO. There's a long way to go.
That's a different question, because Ukraine's not in NATO. So what Donald Trump said last week is, I'm not going to make security guarantees beyond very much. We're going to have Europe do that.
Yeah.
So on this central question, I'll ask again, is it your belief, and has the American president told you, that he would, with American military backing, whatever it is, whether it's fast jets or long-range radar, would he guarantee any peace deal that is agreed between Ukraine and Russia?
Well, that's the subject of discussion.
So there's no guarantee yet?
He clearly said he would have our backs. And as a result of my meeting on Thursday, the most significant thing in my view was that our teams, the US team and the UK team, are going to be meeting about that very issue. That is progress, and I'm interested in material progress. We've gone, I think the way this works, to my mind, is that European countries have to do more and provide a security guarantee, and that's what I'm discussing with President Macron and others. It's what I'll be discussing today. But I've always been clear that that is going to need a US backstop, because I don't think it would be a guarantee without it. I don't think it would be a deterrence without it. So the two have to go together. So for me, the components of a lasting peace are a strong Ukraine to fight on if necessary and to be in a position of strength to negotiate, a European element to security guarantees, and that's why I've been forward-leaning on this about what we would do, and a US backstop. And that's the package. All three parts need to be in place, and that's what I'm working hard to bring together.
And undoubtedly, everybody around the world can see you're working incredibly hard to do that, and you'll have, I think, more than a dozen leaders coming here today. But do you think that President Zelensky has done anything wrong?
No, I think this is a man whose country has been at war for 3 years. They have been invaded by Russia. This is Russian aggression. I remember when the Berlin Wall came down as a young man, I thought that I'd never see Russian troops go over a border in Europe again. I thought we'd moved on to a new era. So when that happened, it's clear it's Russian aggression, and the quickest way to end this conflict is Russia to stop the aggression, and we need to be really clear about that.
Why does President Trump seem to find it so hard to be clear about that? He says, I'm not for Ukraine, I'm not for Russia, I'm in the middle.
Well, look, I'm not going to come on here, Laura, and start speaking for President Trump. He can speak for himself in relation to this. I know what he wants, which is lasting peace. I genuinely believe that is his motivation. I agree with it. I think it's the central most important thing for European security and defence, and our own security and defence, because, this is about the United Kingdom and our national security, our national interests. We've already been impacted in terms of the cost of living crisis, the energy crisis. So that conflict is not just about Ukraine. It is also something felt very materially back at home.
Everybody watching would know how they felt it through their own energy bills.
We have to do everything we can to bring about the lasting peace. It's in our own interest, it's in European interest, and it's certainly in the interest of the Ukrainians.
Part of whether that's possible is whether the leaders who have to come to the table can trust each other. Now, you've said that Zelensky's done nothing wrong. One of the concerns that he was expressing in the Oval Office is that it's hard to trust Vladimir Putin's word. Would you trust Putin?
Well, no, I wouldn't trust Putin, which is why I want a security guarantee. I wouldn't trust him not to come again, because he's proven that he will come again. He's already done it, and we know what his ambitions are. But that is precisely why we need a guarantee to the deal. There's no point in a deal that falls apart after a number of months or years, and therefore the guarantee is because I believe there's a risk that Putin will come again if he's given the opportunity to do so. And I think we need to shut that opportunity out, which is why I've been so centrally focused on what a guarantee is. How do we defend the line if a line is agreed in the deal?
And do you trust President Zelensky?
Yes, I do.
Do you trust Donald Trump?
Yes, I do. And,
Why do you trust Donald Trump when on Thursday he made one set of remarks and then on Friday gave the whole world a completely different impression? Because
I've spoken to him a number of times. I've got to know him. I've had extensive discussions with him, and I believe his motivation is lasting peace. That is my strong...
He said last week that President Zelensky was a dictator, and then a couple of days later said, oh, did I say that?
I've been clear. President Zelensky is obviously elected leader of this country.
This is about how you can trust Donald Trump when he says one thing one day and one thing the next.
During the Second World War, we suspended elections. But if the central question you're putting to me is, do I trust Donald Trump when he says he wants lasting peace? The answer to that question is yes. But also, take a step back, the relationship between the US and the UK is the closest relationship of any two countries in the world. Our defence, our security, our intelligence are bound up one with another in a way that is not seen anywhere else in the world. We trade together, we fought wars together, and so this is a central, really important relationship. The words a special relationship, they're not just a sort of nice phrase. If you look at our defence, security and intelligence arrangements, they're intertwined like no other two countries. That's really important for our own national security. We need to be really clear in relation to the relationship itself between our two countries.
And it's clearly very valuable to you, and clearly you've made a bond of sorts with Donald Trump in the time that you've been in office. But lots of people, though, look at how Donald Trump behaves in this country and don't like it very much. And there are people like the SNP, for example, other public figures saying he shouldn't be given a second state visit. That's an unprecedented thing. It wasn't given to Reagan. It wasn't given to George Bush. Why does Donald Trump deserve a second state visit? Or, frankly, was it a diplomatic enticement so that you could get him on board? Well,
that's a matter for the King. The King has extended the invitation.
It wouldn't have happened if the government hadn't wanted it to, Prime Minister. Come on, everybody knows that.
The invitation. But again, this is a moment of real fragility in Europe. It's a very serious moment. You said so yourself opening the programme. You're absolutely right. And therefore, the central most important thing, what drives me is what I'm saying and doing more likely to bring about peace, a lasting peace, or not? If the answer is yes, I'll do it. If the answer is not, I won't do it. So I've seen people ramping up the rhetoric and taking to Twitter and saying what they would do. Good for them. I'm not that interested in that. I'm interested in what are the practical steps, what are the bridge building that I can do, what are the relationships that I can mend and take forward to take us to lasting peace in Europe. And in the end, that's my central concern. I'm not going to be diverted by the SNP or others trying to ramp up the rhetoric without really appreciating what is the single most important thing at stake here. We're talking about peace in Europe.
And you emphasise there how serious this is, and you say it's about peace in Europe. A lot of people have been alarmed, I think, by what's happened in the last few days. We've seen that and we've heard that from viewers. Are people listening today wrong to be scared when they hear people talking about our long-term alliances that have kept us safe for decades being in jeopardy?
Well, I know there's a level of concern, and I want to reassure because our relationship with the US is extremely important, and we will maintain it. And Donald Trump and I have talked about this, and we've expressed that together we want to take the relationship from strength to strength. So we share that ambition as well. Lots of people are urging me to choose between the US on the one hand and Europe on the other. Wrong choice. As a country, we've never done that. As a Labour Party, we've never done that. And we shouldn't do it now. So we are in this position of having a special relationship with the US, having a strong relationship with Europe. We need to maintain both. And, you know, in the Second World War, in the aftermath, we never made that choice, and we're not going to make it now. We have to be really clear about that.
So today your focus will be on the European leaders who are arriving in London. There's always been plenty of rhetorical support for President Zelensky, but you have in recent days said that European countries have to step up. You've announced your own increase in defence spending. But what kind of action do you hope you can achieve today? Because I've been told that sometimes you get a bit fed up with people making beautiful speeches and giving all the rhetoric about Ukraine.
That's a general disposition of mine. I've seen
you're generally fed up?
No, I mean, in Parliament the whole time, you get brilliant rhetorical speeches, but nothing done, and it's kind of not the way I like to do politics.
So what do you want today? If you're going to bang the table in Downing Street?
No, that's not my style, as you know. 2 or 3 things. Firstly, I do think the Europeans have stood up in the last 3 years. European countries have provided a lot of aid, a lot of money, a lot of training, a lot of capability to Ukraine, and we should acknowledge that. I do think that generally Europe needs to do more in its own defence and security, and that's why I've said we need to increase spending, we've got to increase capability, and we've got to coordinate more, because in the Ukraine conflict we've seen that the coordination isn't there. I think then on top of that we need to be clear what a European security guarantee would look like. I do acknowledge, as you put this to me, that that's more likely to be in the first instance, a coalition of the willing. In other words, we've got to find those countries in Europe that are prepared to be a bit more forward-leaning. I'm not criticising anyone here, but rather than sort of move at the pace of every single member, every single country in Europe, which would in the end be quite a slow pace.
So
I do think we've got to probably get to a coalition of the willing now.
UK,
and move
France,
this forward.
how many other countries?
I think UK and France are the most advanced in the thinking on this, and that's why President Macron and I are going to be working on this plan, which we'll then discuss with the US. That is a step in the right direction. This is not an exclusion. I'm not trying, the more the better in this, but we need to move to a quicker, more agile way of going forward. And I think that is a coalition of the willing at this stage.
The thing is, when you talk about increasing defence spending, increasing the effort, you're quite a recent convert to this. I mean, it is 4 months since the Chief of the Defence Staff sat in that chair and made it perfectly clear that he believed at this dangerous moment the government had to spend more on defence. This argument has been running for months and months and months. And it's only since Donald Trump has arrived in the White House that you've come round to that way of thinking. Why?
I think that the argument that we needed to spend more on defence started probably 3 years ago when that conflict started.
Yes, it's taken you 3 years to realise it, some people might suggest.
We've been in power for 7, 8 months now. I was only going to move on this when I had a credible plan with a clear date, and I could stand up in the House of Commons and say where every single pound and penny was going to come from. Once I got to that stage, obviously, I did that last Tuesday
and some people
made
your party,
difficult decisions in order to get there. But that's a credible, fully funded plan, and I wasn't going to stand up and put forward a plan which wouldn't hold water. Too many others have done that. That's not the way I'm going to do
And some
politics.
people in your own party, including one of your ministers who quit, said the way that you've come up with that plan is wrong, that you are funding the army off the backs of the poor because you're getting money from the aid budget. Annalisa Dodds resigned, saying the cuts will remove food and healthcare from desperate people. Is she wrong, Prime Minister?
Well, look, Annalisa Dodds is a friend of mine and remains a friend of mine. And she's an incredibly committed politician of the highest integrity. And I respect her hugely on this. Making the decision to cut overseas aid and development, that is not something I wanted to do. But when peace in Europe is in issue, when the security and defence of the country is an issue, then difficult choices have to be made. Now, what I'm going to do now is make sure that we go through line by line what spending we have on aid and make sure we've got our priorities right, because we've got to focus on Gaza, Sudan and Ukraine, of course. But I also want to work in a more innovative way to make sure that we've got more development. I'm committed to development and aid, but I took a difficult decision. I took that decision because of the security concerns and the defence of our country. And in the end, the first duty of a Prime Minister is to keep his or her country safe. And I take that duty extremely seriously.
Prime Minister Keir Starmer, thank you so much for coming in. I know you have to leave now, but going to go and see international leaders is just about as good as an excuse I've ever heard for leaving an interview on time. But we appreciate you coming in, and I think viewers will understand why we focused only on Ukraine. So come back soon and we'll talk about all the other things that our viewers care about. Thank you so much. Well, across the BBC today, our colleagues will cover all of today's events as they unfold. Of course, always do let us know what you think of what is going on. You can email us Kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk, of course, or if you're a social media kind of person, you can use the hashtag BBC Laura Kay, and our WhatsApp number is there for you too. Let's get then to our panel who've been patiently listening over here. Piers, Christiane and Greg, welcome to all of you. We've done things a bit unusually today because the Prime Minister had to leave. I wonder there, Christiane, if we did hear a bit more about what is in this peace plan of Donald Trump, vague perhaps, but a line must be agreed between Ukraine and Russia. Then there'll be European forces guaranteeing that line somehow. What did you make of what you heard?
It's still very vague, but what Prime Minister said was much more clear. And I think the big story here is that he made it very clear that the whole alliance understands that Ukraine is the victim, that Russia is the aggressor, that the alliance stands with Ukraine. People have thought that President Trump stands with Russia in his public demeanour. The other thing he made very clear is we are on our own. Did you hear that? We're going to be doing a coalition of the willing. We're going to be discussing with the leading European leaders, and then we're going to be telling the United States. President Trump appears, according to the Prime Minister, to have bowed to the inevitable. He's not been able to deliver. He's not been able to get Putin to agree to anything, much less an enforcement force. And now Europe has to pick up the pieces.
So, Pierre, what did you make of that? I know you spoke to President Trump after the visit with Starmer, but before the then explosion with President Zelensky. What did you make of what we heard from Keir Starmer there?
I liked it. I think the Prime Minister's had the best week he's had since he took office. And I think he's very right to not try and create more division between the UK and the United States. And it's not easy to deal with Donald Trump. I've known him 20 years. I've negotiated. I've had a worse scene with him shouting at me louder over an interview where somebody had leaked stuff to him about negative things I said about him. So I've been in that environment. And it can get pretty hostile very quickly, but it can also calm down very quickly. I was struck by the fact the Prime Minister says he's been having conversations with Donald Trump, with President Macron. Look, you have to understand the American position in this and where Trump comes from and why I think things got fractious in the Oval Office. Yes, it was unedifying. It was also riveting, and it was also very revealing about where both sides are thinking about this. And I think the key thing with the Americans, they are sick and tired of being taken, as they think, for granted by Europe.
Well, let's talk then to one of those Americans. Greg, welcome to the show. It's good to have you with us. You were a backer of Donald Trump. I think a lot of people in this country, well, we know a lot of people in this country, even the Prime Minister pretty much admitted it there, saw those scenes in the Oval Office and thought that is no way to behave. You know Donald Trump. Why did he explode like that?
Well, I think he was prompted by Zelensky. I mean, that was clear. I mean, it wasn't just a misstep by President Zelensky, but it was also a missed opportunity. And I think when he started, criticizing Vice President J.D. Vance, and that became a criticism of President Trump, I think it was a big mistake.
What did he do wrong? Because I saw Christiane, you arched an eyebrow very elegantly
just
there.
With due respect, it was Vice President Vance that started the bad bit, so to speak. Well, apparently the first bit of the presser or the spray was going fairly well, fairly under control. But President Trump and J.D. Vance have flipped the actual narrative on its head, blaming President Zelensky for his country being invaded, calling him a dictator, delegitimizing him and Ukraine, when everybody knows they're the victim.
No, I really disagree. And in fact, and if you look at someone like Dan Crenshaw, who's not a MAGA guy, not a big Trump supporter, he's making a really good point in the last few weeks. You have to flatter, you have to at least get Putin to come to the table. What the Prime Minister just said is that President Trump wants peace. And so there was a great 40 minutes of dialogue. It also showed how well Prime Minister Keir Starmer did on Thursday when you saw how President Zelensky did not
what are you looking for on your phone?
I'm looking for a conservative commentator in the United States, Bret Stephens, who after this shameful display in the White House said the following. If Roosevelt had told Churchill to sue for peace on any terms with Adolf Hitler and to fork over Britain's coal reserves to the United States in exchange for no American security guarantee, it might have approximated what Trump did to Zelensky. And to what you've just said, he also said, whatever one might say about Zelensky's playing his cards, and I agree, could have not taken the bait, either by failing to behave with a degree of all-fours sycophancy that Trump demands.
Okay,
so that's
Greg,
where we are.
What do you say to that? Because it was clearly a real explosion. But
it was a complete explosion. And I think, again, it was a missed opportunity for Zelensky. He could have gone to Washington with a bit of thanks. He did thank the president or thank the Americans at the beginning. President Trump was very flattering, very cooperative with Zelensky at the beginning. Again, the first 40 minutes. Both were playing to their domestic base. And I think you saw that President Trump was definitely playing to the MAGA base.
I think a deal is more likely.
Well,
absolutely.
I've got to say,
do you believe, having spoken to Trump, what Keir Starmer believes, which he said repeatedly, he believes that Donald Trump wants a lasting
100%. And also, you've got to remember, Trump is trying to get Putin to the table too. And so if he comes out whacking Putin, as people want him to, everyone in Britain wants him to go, Putin's a disgusting dictator. If that happens, Putin's not going to come to the table. We may not like it. None of this is going to be particularly edifying. But Trump is trying to straddle getting Putin to the table, getting Zelensky to the table. I actually think the genius move in all this has been this minerals deal. Because as Trump has said, and it comes down to security guarantees, if American contractors and business people are all over Ukraine getting these minerals out of the ground on a constant rolling basis, and America's making tons of money from it, which will appease Trump's base because they will see it's not costing them money to be there, is it going to be enough to deter Putin from attacking Ukraine again if there are Americans on the ground? And that's the key point, I think, with Zelensky. He's not sure that's enough. And that's why I found that debate. It was unedifying, yes, but it was very revealing for that collision point. Is it enough to have the contractors on the ground digging up the minerals, will it deter Putin?
The answer is no. I've covered war and peace is not enough.
It may not be.
Well, let's hear then a view from Ukraine, of course, because the country at the centre of this is, of course, watching all of this nervously on. After those hot tempers, Zelensky did say that he was thankful for America's help. He spoke to Fox News late on Friday night. But he does want Trump to stand more firmly by Ukraine's side. So what does it feel like for Ukrainians right now watching on? Ivana Klimpa-Shchadze is the head of the Committee on Relations with the EU in Ukraine. So what needs to come next?
I think it's a plan of action that is desperately needed, and it's pretty urgent. So we have to go from words of very much appreciated support that have been pouring out over this week and later over this 24 hours. But at the same time, I think it's about finding the resources where which can be used in order to invest in the defense production, both in Ukraine, Europe-wise, and in procurement also in the United States. I think it is important to ensure that there is a readiness to step up all these efforts on the European level, and also about the steps. How do we try to re-engage the American leadership on the right side of the history?
But with all this going on, what does it feel like to be in Ukraine at the moment?
You know, we are living in the situation when every single day we have to hide in shelters from the Russian whole of country attacks by rockets, by the Shahid drones and different types of drones, attacking our civilian residential buildings, our infrastructure, attacking obviously the front line, making sure that we Ukrainians are exterminated as a nation and as a people that have their own culture, their own sovereign right to develop and live, actually the very basic right to live. We are tired, exhausted, but very resolute people. We want to live. We want to our children to build and create and to enjoy life, and that is what we are going to try to fight for. And we hope that all the nations that believe in that right of every sovereign nation will be standing with us. If we fall, if we fail, it won't be our failure, because we've done more than anybody could have imagined with your backing and with your support. So I hope that everybody understands that there is a next line of those who will have to fight if Ukrainians are not capable of defeating Russian Federation. So it's about lives, your lives, on the European soil, and it's about the prosperity and the democracy, the security that everybody has been enjoying after the Second World War. I think they are at threat. They are under attack with different instruments at this point, but they might be under attack also by military means from the Russian Federation and its accomplices if we Ukrainians won't be there.
Greg, who are the American businesses who are lining up to get their hands on Ukrainian minerals, and why are they so keen?
Well, I think it's been the case for a long time. I mean, we've been preparing for this for 3 years. There's always been anticipation of the post-war investment opportunities. So it's not just in mining, it's in natural gas, of course. Ukraine is the second largest holder of natural gas in Europe. They've got a ton of lithium. They've got a lot of the largest deposits of uranium in Europe. So this is an opportunity. It's not just President Trump that's been talking about this.
Isn't it, though, a bit like blackmail? I mean, Republican presidents in days gone by, you know, somebody, former defense minister, said to me a couple of weeks ago, if this was Ronald Reagan, he would want to be supporting Ukraine to protect democracy around the world, rather than Donald Trump wanting to do this to get cash out of Ukraine that's been invaded by an aggressor.
You could do both. He is not taking assets out of Ukraine. He's looking to develop a partnership with the Ukrainians. Both countries will profit from this. It's good for business. It's good for the Ukrainian people. That's, again, why I thought it was a shame that, or a potential misstep on Friday. It can be fixed. I think it will be fixed. There's a lot of private equity interest, not just minerals and mining companies, a lot of PE interest from America, also from the Middle East. So there's a great opportunity. That's President Trump's style. Same thing with the Abraham Accords. This is, let's do business instead of kill each other.
Christian,
and I think that's a really noble cause.
Maybe then other leaders just misunderstand Donald Trump. They just need to understand what he's interested in order to achieve what
but
would
that's
be
all
a
well and
positive.
good. We know he's a businessman. We know he's a transactional. Remember I told you on your first show, it'll be all transactional all the time. This is it. Ben Wallace, the former Tory Minister of Defence, said to me this week, it's extortion. That was his word. Before they redrafted it and it became a little bit more signable. It's extortion. He reminded me that Britain had been loaned weaponry and armaments during World War II, and in 2006 they repaid it. He reminded me also that Trump's figures about what the US is giving are untrue.
Or the $350
It's just not true, half of which at least has come from Britain and Europe.
We've got to think of the big picture. That's why I like what the Prime Minister kept saying. This is about getting peace in Ukraine. Everybody knows this war's at a stalemate. Nothing's really happened on the battlefield for the last 8-9 months, except more and more people getting killed. There's no real change in the territory. And it's pretty clear to me what's going to happen. They're going to allow Russia to retain most of the territory they've taken. That sticks in my gullet that they're going to do that. But that is where we are with the reality of this war. Trump wants peace if he does a transactional business deal where, you've got to remember, in America, a lot of Americans do not like the continued support of billions of US dollars at a time with a cost of living crisis going on this war.
It's all being plowed back into the United States economy. Excuse me.
Again,
the Defense Secretary says that it's a load of old stock that's been sent to Ukraine.
Why does that matter?
And money,
Why does that matter?
because it's good for America.
But of course, but if
it's good for America.
If it brings peace, why is it wrong, but it's also good for America?
Peace is great. But the question is, on whose terms? And everything we've heard from Trump is it's on Putin's terms. Will Putin agree to a coalition of the willing?
Can Ukraine get peace without America?
Can you see Donald Trump being impressed by the UK and the French coming forward with troops, a coalition of the willing to guard a peace line, and that would be enough for him?
President Trump will love that. That's what he's been arguing for years. It's why he
offloaded
pressed
onto
down the
Europe.
Germans in 2018. And I think it depends on the biggest economies in Europe and the nuclear
Which is actually why
Without
today
a
is
doubt.
so important.
We should pay a lot more for our defence.
Okay,
America pays more of its GDP than any other European country.
It's interesting how much...
Step up Europe, and then Trump, I think, will calm down, and this will get sorted.
That's right.
We will see what happens by the end of the day, but we're grateful to all of you for your insights, because this week it really does feel like the world has been somehow shifting on its axis, and it is hard to believe that all this has happened so fast.
Prime Minister Starmer, you've been terrific in our discussions. You're a very tough negotiator, however. I'm not sure I like that, but that's okay.
You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III. And what you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. This is going to be great television, I will say that.
We are thankful and sorry for this. I mean, we wanted very much to have only strong relations, and I'm very calm that we will have it.
Well, Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader, is here. Welcome. It's great to have you with us on such an important day. The Prime Minister described putting together what he said would be a coalition of the willing. And we don't have all the details, but what we understand is that there would be some UK troops, some French troops available to guard and to maintain a peace in Ukraine after a deal had been done. Is that something the Conservatives would support?
Well, I think we need to know, as you say, exactly what that means. Last week, I did ask him, when he talked about putting British troops on the ground, where was the money coming from? What were the guarantees around that? We certainly shouldn't be doing it on our own. And, you know, looking at the scenes from last week, it's really important that this summit that the Prime Minister is having today goes well. We support him in that. This is a key issue of national interest for us. There is not a difference between the Conservative and Labour parties in terms of the extent of support that we have for Ukraine. People know what we did under Prime Minister Johnson and his successors. And we want to make sure that the Prime Minister is successful in helping Ukraine, but also in maintaining our national interest at all times.
What did you think when you saw those scenes in the Oval Office on Friday night with President Trump berating President Zelensky?
Honestly, My heart went out to President Zelensky. I watched it and I couldn't believe what was happening. He was being humiliated. I don't think we should conduct these sorts of difficult conversations in front of the cameras. And we have to remember that President Zelensky is a hero. He is the person who represents that strength and resilience of the Ukrainian people. And whatever differences and difficulties we might have during negotiations, we need to be able to set them aside when everyone's watching, because the only person who would have liked that would have been Vladimir Putin.
Do you think it was an ambush? I mean, there have been suggestions it was some kind of deliberate setup to make President Zelensky be humiliated?
No, I don't think it was an ambush. I think that both parties are working for their respective national interest, and they seem to be speaking at cross purposes. I think sometimes having English as a second language is not necessarily helpful. During all the trade negotiations I had as trade secretary, most of the Eastern European countries had an interpreter there. I'm not necessarily sure that we should be doing more than the set piece bits on camera. I don't think that was helpful. But we need to make sure that we can get the conversations back on track. It is critical that Ukraine is at the table for any negotiation. We should be negotiating a peace settlement, not a surrender. We need to make sure that President Zelensky feels that he has autonomy. They are a sovereign country, and the principles that we're defending are the freedom of Ukraine and sovereignty.
Given what happened on Friday, though, do you stand by saying Donald Trump is a force for good in the world?
America is a force for good in the world. Donald Trump is the president. I think that he is, yes. So I'm not changing that. And I think we need to be very careful. Lots of people have personal views about Donald Trump, but whether or not you like the president or the vice president is separate from our relationship as the UK with the US. That is something that is absolutely vital. If people are worried about what we're spending on defense now, if we don't have an American security guarantee within NATO, if we lose them, we're going to be spending a hell of a lot more. We need to make sure that America does not disengage. It is in their interest for peace now. If we all get dragged into an escalation, America will get dragged into it eventually. That's bad for all of us.
Do you, though, believe that President Trump knows who the villain is? And I ask you that question because you wrote on social media, we need to remember who the villain is. But we all heard Donald Trump say, oh, you know, I don't want to give Ukraine an advantage. I'm for Russia and I'm from Ukraine. I'm kind of in the middle. Do you think he knows who the villain is, to use your word? Well,
the US, has a long history with Russia, but we have more recent issues. You'll remember the Salisbury poisoning, for example. So we are on the continent. We know what is at stake. And I think sometimes, in the heat of the moment, things can be forgotten. And when we say that we need to remember who the villain is Vladimir Putin invaded a sovereign country. He could end this war today by withdrawing, and we must not forget that.
But do you think? But my question is really: do you think President Trump sometimes forgets that?
I think President Trump is practicing his own kind of diplomacy. I understand. It was a point that Piers made very well, that he needs to get both sides to the table. And so just criticising willy-nilly is not necessarily helpful.
But it's
I think
not
that's what's
criticising,
happened.
it's about whether or not the American president, who, as you say, is trying to bring this thing together, but about whether he sees the two countries as equivalent, or whether he sees one country as the country that must be protected and the other as the country that ought to stop, that should never have started this in the first place, which is how every other Western country sees it.
Well, I cannot speak for President Trump. I can only speak for the UK and how we see things, and I've been very clear. Vladimir Putin is the villain.
You agree with the government that defence spending must go up, but you've written today it must hit 3% of national income by the end of this by the end of the decade, and that would be a huge increase. Absolutely. Even though the percentages sound like they're quite small, but that would be a very significant increase. Where would you be willing to cut from public services that people already enjoy, or things that people rely on, or potentially raise tax in order to get that extra money? I suspect you're not going to go for the raising tax.
So this is a fundamental question. When I was in cabinet, we talked about getting to 3% by 2030, and we couldn't make the numbers work. We need to find a way to make the numbers work because the world is changing very quickly. And with things like defence, you can't make a decision at the last minute. It takes years, well beyond Parliament, to actually get the equipment produced. People will not start making the equipment unless they know we're going to spend the money. We're not ordering dresses here. We're ordering tanks, missiles, new technology that is not even on the books yet.
So where do you get the money from?
So that requires, fundamentally, economic growth. And the problem we have now is that what Labour is doing is reducing growth, not increasing it.
But where would you get the money from?
I'm speaking now about what the economy needs. I am not in the government. We will help them to get there. But what I'm not going to do is make spending plans when we don't have access to the books anymore. We've talked about making savings on development. I'm very pleased that the Prime Minister now agrees with me. I remember when he was in Jeremy Corbyn's cabinet and they were talking about disbanding NATO.
But if you want to get to 3%, you'd have to be willing to look at other options.
Yes, of course we have to.
And you said you support the government.
Yes, of course we have to. But what I'm not going to do is make policy on the fly. This sort of thing requires real thinking. Let's start looking at what we can do. It's not about making an announcement on breakfast TV. It's about us setting up task forces, looking at the economy. What can we do?
But your shadow
what should we
defence
do with the
secretary
fiscal
told us
statement?
last week that you should look at welfare in order to make savings.
Yes, and I said that in my letter to
defence.
Keir Starmer as well. But that's not going to deliver what could be up to 100 billion. We have to look seriously at our whole economy, how it is wired, how we do procurement. We should be looking perhaps at 10-year budgets for defence, so that we're not just looking at what's going to happen till the next election, but much longer term. That's something that I'm willing to work with the Prime Minister on.
Are you going to give up your opposition to the Chagos deal? Now, President Trump has appeared to back it. He said on Thursday, I think we'll be inclined to go along with your country. I have a feeling it's going to work out very well. So if the American president has given it a green light, is there any point you carrying on resisting it?
I don't work for the American president. This is about UK national interest. It is not in our national interest to give away the Chagos Islands and pay for the privilege of doing so. That is taxpayers' money. That is money which the Prime Minister seems to have confirmed is coming out of the defence increase that he has just announced. That's terrible. He did not deny it when he was asked. So we will not stop our opposition to the surrender of the Chagos Islands. We will continue.
We asked Keir Starmer this question too, and I think people will be interested to know. We know from viewers getting in touch with us and general public reaction, a lot of people feel quite alarmed by what's happened in the last few weeks. Lots of people in this country feel a real affinity for Ukraine. Lots of people have taken Ukrainians into their homes in this country. And do you think people are wrong to feel scared at the moment when they see all this turmoil and questions being asked about our long-term security?
I don't think people should feel scared, but I do think we need to stop being complacent and assume that things will always be fine and we don't need to change anything. The way to make sure that we can provide reassurance is by focusing on security, thinking ahead and not waiting until things happen and then being reactive. Of course, we have a lot of affinity with Ukraine, especially since the war. Most of us in the country know so much more about Ukraine now than we did in 5 years ago. But we have to make sure that we are staying resilient so we can continue to support them. We have to be strong so that we can help Ukraine.
Kemi Badenoch, thanks so much for coming in this morning on such an important day. It's great to have you with us. Thank you very much indeed. Well, of course, the relationship between our two countries has been very strong, and the King has even invited President Zelensky to go and see him this afternoon. So a real show of affection will be extended to President Zelensky while he's here in London. Let's talk now to the leader of the Lib Dem, Sir Davey, who joins us from southwest London. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I've asked all the leaders this morning, but what did you think when you saw the scenes in the Oval Office on Friday?
I was shocked and appalled. Our Prime Minister had done a good job with following on from President Macron in trying to reach out to Donald Trump, and then the President and Vice President are seemingly on a premeditated attack on President Zelensky. I was shocked and appalled, and I think it worries people because it suggests that the President isn't as predictable and reliable as his predecessors.
You say our government should be standing up to bullies, suggesting the American president is one. Do you think the state visit for Donald Trump should be cancelled?
No, I don't. What we've said in the Liberal Democrats all along is that the state visit should be used to secure guarantees for Ukraine. As the Prime Minister rightly said, we need security guarantees in any peace deal. And although the Prime Minister seems confident that they would come, they're not there yet, as he had to admit to you. And therefore, I think we should use every single card that we have. And I think it should be made clear to the White House that the state visit would be a genuine one. We would welcome him here, but on condition that he steps up, that the US steps up to work with the UK and Europe to support and defend Ukraine.
Is it realistic, though, to imagine that the UK government could say that to any American president? And is that the right approach at a time of real peril like this, saying, look, you can only have tea with the king if you do what we ask you to? Is that realistic?
Well, it can be implicit in what we're saying. I mean, the Prime Minister, I think, is actually doing a good job in trying to bridge this extremely difficult relationship. Having to deal with someone as unreliable, as unpredictable as President Trump, I actually feel for him. But I think he's managed to play his cards well. I was interested when he told you earlier today that he's been on the phone and trying to bridge the gap that emerged in the Oval Office on Friday. And it looks like he and President Macron will be talking to President Zelensky about how a peace deal could work and then relaying that to President Trump. And I think as they do that, as they try to bring then President Trump towards Zelensky's position, I think they need to be clear that the security guarantees are needed and everything is on the table.
Would you support the notion of a coalition of the willing, as the Prime Minister described it, with UK and French troops being used to guard any peace deal that is done? Would you be happy to back that?
Yes, if there is a credible peace deal, if there is a peace deal that Ukraine supports, I think that is actually what we should all do. Liberal Democrats have been arguing for some time about the need to work with our European neighbours more closely, whether it's on our economy or on our security. And I think recent developments have shown that that is absolutely the way to go. And it's not just about making sure we have that reassurance force with the British Army and the French Army and others there to secure that peace, but it's also about the longer term on defence spending. We've argued for a European rearmament bank so we can get the money into European, obviously British, defence manufacturing so we can increase our capabilities, because that's what's going to be needed in the long term. We can't rely, and unfortunately, as much as we have done on the United States, the Prime Minister's right to treasure that relationship, and we've always supported the special relationship. But I think everybody can see that that's under strain, and with President Trump so unreliable, we've got to make sure that we have alternatives.
Davey, thank you so much for joining us on this important day. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Even though you weren't joining us in the studio, but it's good to have you with us on the programme. Now then, it is nearly 10 o'clock on this momentous day as European leaders are arriving in London to work out the next moves to help protect Ukraine after the brutal bust-up between its president and the President of the United States in the Oval Office. The Prime Minister here is hosting the talks, and he told us he wants to put together a coalition of the willing to protect the war-torn country.
We've now agreed that the United Kingdom, along with France and possibly one or two others, will work with Ukraine on a plan to stop the fighting, and then we'll discuss that plan with the United States.
Well, let's, as we close the programme, do two things. Let's think about the worst-case scenario and then end with the best-case scenario. So, Christiane, what's the worst-case scenario?
The worst-case scenario is that Putin doesn't want peace, he wants victory. Putin does not, and has not stated, I think, to Trump or to anybody that he agrees with a sovereign, independent, democratic Ukraine. He wants to subsume it. He wants to not do all of this, and all his public statements, including his former Prime Minister, Dmitry Medvedev, who said, yeah, Trump is right. Zelensky is gambling with World War III. That is a Putin-Kremlin talking point. He's been saber-rattling the whole time. And I think it's unfair that Trump said that to Zelensky, you have no cards. His people are the cards. They've been fighting for 3 years to save themselves, and only incremental moves have been happening from Russia.
Greg, what do you think the worst-case scenario is?
Worst-case scenario is World War III. We have nuclear powers involved here, so that's obviously, it's probably stating the obvious. But the best-case scenario is Zelensky comes back ready to talk peace and does a minerals deal, which will lead to peace, and it'll also have implicit American support.
Piers?
Yeah, listen, don't overreact to what happened in the Oval Office. Everyone's gone, as they do with everything
You would
involving
never do
Trump.
that.
I would absolutely do that.
There you go, Laura. Call him out.
I'm getting calmer in my old age, actually. I think it's because I'm turning 60 soon. It's just calm, getting the old zen back. Thank you, Christiane. No, I think you have to be pragmatic about where we are with this. Everybody, it seems to me, wants peace. Trump thinks he can bring Putin to the table with Zelensky, who is a hero. His people have been heroic. They've lasted way longer than anyone thought they could. But we are where we are, and the deal has to be done. I think that they're going to sign the minerals deal. I'm already looking at Zelensky's feed on X, constant posts mollifying the Americans. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to the American people. He's doing that deliberately because he wants to get back in the room, do the first stage of his deal. But the crucial thing is going to be the security guarantees, how that looks.
And that's the best case scenario, because a minerals deal is not a peace deal. Let's be very clear. It's not a peace deal. It's not a security guarantee. Let's be very clear. So I think all your cross-party, the Prime Minister and the leaders of the parties here were very clear. A peace deal that's a just deal, even if it means freezing the lines somewhere and being policed so that Putin can't come back. Because everybody thinks that he will once he's had a chance to rearm. And he's not winning the war.
Remember that Putin did not try anything during Trump's last term. Trump is betting on his relationship with Putin, that if he puts a bunch of Americans working on the ground in Ukraine, that Putin won't try anything.
And yet, Greg...
And I think that's an interesting point. I think Putin probably would think twice.
But, Greg, can you see a situation where President Trump would be willing not just to have American mining companies on the eastern flank of Ukraine, which may or may not be an effective deterrent for Vladimir Putin? Who knows? Pierre suggests it might be, but we just don't know that. But can you see a scenario where your president would say, yes, we'll have miners there, but you can also have American fast jets to police the airspace. You can also have American radar.
Absolutely.
I could imagine
you
can imagine that.
Without a doubt. Remember, this is the president who sent Javelin missiles to Kyiv after Obama and Biden were sending blankets and MREs to a U.S. air base in Poland and shipping it on commercial trucks. Trump comes in, throws some sanctions on Nord Stream 2, kills 200 Russian mercenaries in Syria, and then also sends Javelin and other lethal materials. This is not a president who rolls over for Putin. I can see that scenario for sure. Let's do the deal first. Scott Bessent, the great Secretary of the Treasury, did the deal with Zelensky last week. And of course, Zelensky sort of backed away from it. I think he'll be back next week.
Zelensky wanted security guarantees. That's why he went to the US, ready to sign the deal with security guarantees.
And here's the crunch as we close. Christiane, can you see a scenario where President Zelensky signs a deal with America without having written in blood a promise that his country would be genuinely
I think it's going to be very, very
backing
difficult, to be honest with you. But I think it's really, really important what happens after today. Prime Minister is absolutely right. Gather the coalition of the willing. Understand that they have to be independent of the United States while trying to maintain some kind of background special relationship agreement so that when Trump calms down, that maybe that he can come back. And maybe these things that we've been talking about. Kurt Volker, the former Trump envoy, said, look, it is going to happen. This is, before the blow-up. It is going to happen. We'll have air cover. We'll have anti-air defense. We'll have the intelligence. This cannot happen without all of that stuff.
There will be a deal. You watch. Trump is going to do this deal because he does want peace. That I can tell you from talking to him this week. He wants peace.
Does Putin want peace?
Well, this is why you've got to give Trump some leeway in how he deals with Putin. We may not like it, but he's got to get Putin in that room, and he's got to get Zelensky in that room, and they've got to do a deal.
And from your conversation on the phone with President Trump this week, maybe one day he'll speak to the BBC instead of phoning you up all the time.
I'll put a good word in for you, Laura.
That would be great.
Yeah.
That you believe that he is sincere, not just in ending the war, but having a lasting deal so that Putin can't reload and then come back.
Can I just make one comment? Alistair Campbell, who's been in the room many times before, said on the radio today, to the BBC this week, rather, Trump has to stop pretending that he's on a TV episode of This Is a Peace Deal and actually do the work.
Okay.
Actually do the work, which the Americans can.
Well, we believe in doing lots of work on TV as well.
Campbell about doing peace.
You might not.
That's another whole
the bloke who took us into an illegal war in Iraq.
That's another whole programme. But all three of you, thank you so much for your insights. It's been a great discussion this morning. Thank you to you, of course, for watching and spending your Sunday morning with us. A big thank you to all of our guests who've been with us, the Prime Minister, the leader of the opposition parties too. Our teams will keep you up to date with everything as it's unfolding today. History could be made. I'll be with Paddy O'Connell on Sunday's newscast a bit later as we all digest the dangerous drama, ever-changing, that's playing out in front of our eyes. And the Prime Minister is talking of a coalition of the willing to protect Ukraine, to shape what comes next and hopefully create peace. Look forward to seeing you next Sunday, same time, same place. But as we leave you, here's a reminder of some of the historic images in this very important week. Goodbye.
The key question is, where